Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming tonight. We are going to continue covering addendums or forms that you may or may not use if you are representing the seller. The form that we have covered in the past classes was the exclusive right to sell. Tonight, we're going to cover two additional addendums, the first of which is going to be the HOA addendum or the planned community addendum. And then the second that we are going to be covering is, hold on, let me get my notes. The seller disclosures. Two very important addendums that you need to have completed prior to, in my opinion, prior to actually going active or live in the MLS, because they are very important documents that may or may not affect somebody's willingness to put an offer in on the home. So first, let's start with the HOA addendum. And as always, we do read through the entire addendum. I know it's boring, but once you read something over and over, I feel like you just retain the information more, and it will kind of lead us into conversations based on maybe past experience that I or you have had. So let's get started. The seller's notice of the HOA information. Of course, seller's name is going to be the names that are in the MLS on the monsoon. So for example, let's go back here. And this is also a form that you do not fill out. The seller fills out. You can put in their information though, as far as like who they are. And by monsoon, I mean the tax records. You come here and this is going to be what's listed on the forms. Okay, so seller's name here, premises address, the date is a date that is going to be filled out by the seller. You can go ahead and put a date in if you're filling out this top section for them, or you can leave it blank and you can have the seller do that. Instructions. Homeowners Association HOA information on page 1 is to be completed by the seller at the time of the listing, at the time of listing the premises for sale. Upon completion, this addendum shall be uploaded to the MLS if available or delivered to the prospective buyers upon request prior to prospective buyer's submission of a residential resale real estate purchase contract to seller. Per the contract, you have to at least provide this, if not before they put their offer in. If you accept a contract, their offer could be contingent upon receiving the HOA addendum, because again, this is going to affect their ability or willingness to move forward with an offer or who pays for what. So you just have to provide it if you're already under contract within 3 days of contract acceptance. If you do not deliver this by day 3 after contract acceptance, then you are in, or your client, the seller, are in breach of contract. Associations governing the premises. What is the name of the HOA? What is their phone number? Who is the management company, if any? You know, a lot of companies or people just put the same thing. It's fine. Like, for example, my HOA is Santan Ranch, but my management company is, oh, I'm drawing a blank. Vision. There it is. Vision Community Management. So that's just an example. Phone number is usually going to be the same. What are the amount of dues? 143. How often? Is it monthly? Is it quarterly? Is it yearly? Is it biannual? Just put how often. Quarterly. Any special assessments? So assessments are going to be in addition to a monthly HOA fee. Assessment is very common with condominiums. Maybe it is that they're going to be replacing the roof, or maybe they did replace the roof, and so they have some kind of separate assessment. That's a monthly fee that they're going to charge. And if so, how often, if how much, and when it starts and when it ends, because there should be a start and an end date to a special assessment. Some communities have 2 HOAs. There's going to be the smaller HOA and then the master association. One of the most common that comes off the top of my head is going to be Eastmark. They have 2 associations depending on what area of the community you live in. So make sure that your client, when they're contacting their HOA, is asking all of these questions. Make sure they're being very specific. I don't need to go over this. You guys can read that, but it's basically the same as the HOA, but this is the master association. This is the HOA. And then are there any other fees? So again, pertaining to Eastmark, there might be another fee, and it doesn't have anything to do with the master association or the HOA. It could be, I can't think of the name off the top of my head, but it's F something. But they have a special fee that they pay every month or yearly or biannual, something like that. And then you would put that here, just what is it called? Who do they contact for it? What are the amounts and how often? Fees payable upon close of escrow. So again, this is information that your seller fills out, all of this info. And I'm gonna give you an example once I'm done reading through this, of the importance of being specific. And by, who's being specific, it's a seller asking the questions and then putting what it is or what it is not. Transfer fee, association fees related to the transfer of the title. Does the HOA have a transfer fee? Most of them have a transfer fee, not all of them. So just put in the amounts. I'm just putting in random amounts. Capital improvement fees, including but not limited to those fees labeled as community reserve, asset protection, capital reserve, working capital, community enhancement, future improvement fees, or payments. So is there a capital improvement fee? Say 200, 100, for example. So the example I wanted to give is regarding this. I had a seller fill this out. They put capital improvement fees to be $721. Well, come to find out that it was actually a community enhancement right here, community enhancement fee. And it was actually not $721. It was $2,400. And the buyer's agent, they were given the documents from the HOA. So when you go under contract, title company has to order HOA documents. It's the HOA demand is what it's called. That is delivered to all parties. So when they were delivered that form, if the buyer or the buyer's agent had any issues with what those fees were, they need to speak up. Now, we also need to speak up because it's not fair to the buyer or the buyer's agent if the seller miscommunicated what the actual fees were. It was a complete error. There was no intention or anything done. And I argued for my client that it is always up to the buyer to do their due diligence. And if they had an issue with the fees, then that was their opportunity to state or to, say, hey, wait a minute, you said the fees were only this, but it's actually this. If they had an issue with it, they should have canceled the contract at that point, but they didn't. And that was my argument. Now, granted, should have been caught by us, and I actually did see it. I didn't say anything. So in my mind, I felt like I was being a little sneaky. So I responded to the agent and I said, listen, it is our responsibility to catch things like this. And while it's ultimately up to the buyer, I will cover half of the difference of the fee. Because in my mind, I should have verified what the fees were before listing it. And you should have verified it once the HOA demand came in. And while I don't think I needed to do that, because again, it's up to the buyer, I felt it was the right thing to do because I should have verified it. Point being is if you know something is wrong, say something, have it fixed right away. But also they were fighting me on the wording because I put that it was a capital improvement fee. And she was stating, well, it's not a capital improvement fee, it's a community enhancement fee. And because it clearly states it all right here, it is the exact same fee. But she was trying to state that we did not state that it was a community enhancement fee and that we were in the wrong and that we had to pay for all of that because on page 3, we checked that if any fees were not disclosed, the seller would pay for that. Anyways, long story short, maybe call and verify the information that your seller is giving you before you actually go active. Any questions so far? Cool. Prepaid association fees, dues, assessments, or any of the other association fees paid in advance of their due date. Most title companies, if not all, are going to, at minimum, do 2 months of HOA fees upfront, so at closing, or at least 1 quarter if it's paid quarterly. That is because it takes time to transfer the HOA from one owner to another. And this allows time so that there's no defaulting on the payments for the HOA. So usually it's going to be at least 2 months. So just know that. So in my case, it would be $286. Since my fees were $143 quarterly. Disclosure fee. Association management companies cost incurred in the preparation of a statement. Sorry, my watch is talking to me. Costs incurred in the preparation of a statement or other documents furnished by the association pursuant to the resale of the premises for purposes of resale disclosure, lien estoppels, or any other services related to the transfer or the use of the property. Pursuant to Arizona law, disclosure fees cannot be more than an aggregate of $400 per association. As part of the disclosure fee, each association may charge a statement or other documents update fee of no more than $50 if 30 days or more have passed since the date of the original disclosure statement or the date of documents were delivered. Additionally, each association may charge a rush fee of no more than $100 if rush services are required to be performed within 72 hours after request. Usually disclosure fees are $400. That's the max they can do. Disclosure fees are typically paid by the seller. Going to go down here to page 3. Seller shall pay all disclosure fees as required by Arizona law. So when your seller asks you that, you can refer to page 3. Now, let's say you get under contract. The disclosure, the HOA gets the disclosures, orders them, whatever. They charge you $400 because they've just, they ordered it. Well, then contract number 1 falls out. If you go back under contract and you use the same title company or a different title company, it doesn't matter, and you order disclosures again, make sure you're checking the final statement or the statement, settlement statement emailed to you by title before closing, because sometimes the HOA is going to charge you each and every time you order HOA docs. So there could be an $800 charge on there. If you're nice, you call it the HOA, you say, hey, listen, this is what happened. Is there any way you can reduce this or waive the double disclosure fee? Some associations will do that, but they do not have to because it's each and every time they order the HOA demand or disclosure fees. So just make sure that you know that and that you prep your seller for that if that does happen. I didn't know that happened, and my seller questioned it, and I was like, oh shoot, I had no idea, but they ended up getting it reduced or waived. So it wasn't too big of a deal at the end of the day, but I didn't know. But now I'm telling you because that has happened to me and I wasn't aware that happened. So just know that taking a look at that settlement statement prior to close is super important to make sure that they're not being double charged for stuff and that all the charges are accurate. Other fee, most of the other fees that you're going to see is like a $25 or $29 HomeWise fee. That is just, the ordering of the HOA fee or HOA docs or something. I don't really know what it is, but it's something to do with the HOA and their ordering of it. Seller certification by signing below. Seller certifies that the information contained above is true and complete to the best of the seller's actual knowledge as of the date signed. Brokers did not verify any of the information contained herein. I mean, that kind of relieves us of anything, but I always say double check to make sure. But you don't have to per this. Seller signs this page and this page only. Additional obligations. If the homeowners association has less than 50 units, no later than 10 days after contract acceptance, the seller shall provide in writing the buyer the information described below as required by Arizona law. Oh, and it's 5 days. Sorry, it's not 3 days. 3 days of seller disclosure. If the buyer association has 50 or more units, the seller shall furnish a pending sale that contains the name and address of the buyer to the homeowners association within 5 days after contract acceptance, pursuant to section 3D of the contract. Escrow company is instructed to provide such notice on seller's behalf. The association is obligated to, by Arizona law, to provide information described below to buyer within 10 days after receipt of seller's notice. And excuse my last comment because I was confused. The seller still has to provide this document to the buyer after contract acceptance within 3 days. This is something a little bit different. This is stating that the seller will furnish notice of the pending sale and the buyer's name and address to the homeowners association within 5 days. We don't need to do this. This is typically done by title. So, but just know that this is in and part of the contract. Buyer is allowed 5 days after receipt of the information from the seller or homeowners association to provide written notice of seller of any items disapproved. So know that after you receive all this, after you receive copy of the CCNRs, you've got 5 days to provide written notice of anything disapproved. Okay. So information required by law to be provided by the buyer. You have to provide a copy of the bylaws and the rules of the association. You have to provide a copy of the declaration of covenants, conditions, and restrictions, otherwise known as CCNRs. A dated statement containing the telephone number, the address of the principal contact for the association, which may be an association manager, an association management company, an officer of the association, or any other person designated by the board of directors. The amount of the common expense assessment and the unpaid common expense assessment, special assessment, or other assessment fee or charge currently due and payable from the seller. A statement as to whether a portion of the unit is covered by insurance maintained by the association. The total amount of money held by the association as reserves. If the statement is being furnished by the association, a statement as to whether the records of the association reflect any alterations or improvements to the unit that violate the declaration. The association is not obligated to provide information regarding alterations and improvements that occurred more than 6 years prior to the proposed sale. Seller remains obligated to disclose alterations or improvements to the premises that violate the declaration. The association may take action against the buyer for violations apparent at the time of purchase that are not reflected in the association's records. If the statement is being furnished by the seller, a statement as to whether the seller has knowledge of the alterations or improvements to the unit that violate the declaration. A statement of case names or case numbers for pending litigation with respect to the premises or the association, including the amount of the money claimed. Real quick on this, I had a buyer purchase a home. The HOA stated that there is no outstanding violations. We moved forward to closing. After closing, the new owner, my client, the buyer, stated that the HOA was claiming that the pergola in the backyard had never been approved and that the buyer had to remove it. And I went back to title and I said, wouldn't this have been something that the association would have had informed us of, because the HOA is required to go and do a visual check on the property to make sure that there's no current or outstanding violations, and that they would have had to inform us of that prior to us closing. And because they did not do their job like they said they did, my client was not required to remove it because, again, he purchased the home with the understanding that the HOA had gone out and they had looked at it. It doesn't mean that they won't be required to, take it down in the future, but in this case, we did win it. So make sure that you are paying attention to that kind of stuff and making sure that the HOA has gone out and there is no current violations on property. A copy of the current operating budget of the association is required to be provided. A copy of the most recent annual financial report of the association. If the report is more than 10 pages, the association may provide a summary of the report in lieu of the entire report. A copy of the most recent reserve study of the association, if any. Any other information required by law, and a statement for buyer acknowledgement and signature are required by Arizona law. Any questions about this page? Perfect. Okay, so page 3. So your listing is active. The seller has provided a completed page 1. They have signed it. You've uploaded it to the listing. You, as the buyer's agent, when you're putting in your offer, this is the page that you're going to be filling out for your buyer. Buyer's name goes here. Seller's name should auto-populate here. Address of the premises here. Okay. Line 70, line 71 through 76 to only be completed by the buyer, not the seller. The seller does not touch page 3 until they have an offer. And the buyer has provided this with their offer. The following additional terms and conditions are hereby included as part of the contract between seller and buyer for the above reference premises. Transfer fee shall be paid by who? Buyer, seller, other. If you check other, you need to specify. Typically it's 50%, 50-50. Split. 50-50. Don't just check other and not put anything, because that doesn't mean anything. We don't know what you mean. Be specific. Who's going to pay for the capital improvement fee? Buyer or seller? If you put buyer, buyer pays for the whole thing. You put seller, the seller pays for the whole thing. If you choose other, 50-50, 75-25, whatever it might be. If it's 75 buyers, 25% seller, just be specific. Line 75 has to be checked. Please do not forget it. This is often forgotten. Any additional fees not disclosed on page 1 and payable upon close of escrow shall be paid by who? Buyer, seller, or other, 50-50. Line 75 states the buyer shall pay all prepaid association fees. This is because title takes at least 2 months, if not a quarter, or whatever is required of prepaid association fees. Seller shall pay all disclosure fees as required by Arizona law. In a financed purchase, buyer shall be responsible for all lender fees charged to obtain association management company's documents. Buyer verification. Buyer may contact the association management companies for verbal verification of association fees payable upon close of escrow. Again, this is putting it on the buyer. Yes, the seller did everything that they needed to do. They provided the information to the best of their knowledge on the date they went live or whatnot. The buyer can verify it. Assessments. Any current homeowners association assessment, which is a lien as of the close of escrow, shall be paid in full by the seller. Any assessment that becomes a lien after close of escrow is the buyer's responsibility. Additional terms and conditions. Well, I've never actually put anything here, but if there was something that you wanted the seller to pay for, you could put it here, or the buyer will be willing to pay for something like that. You can put it here. Never used it though. I'll ask Mike, maybe if he's got some examples of what could go here, and then I'll relay that. Buyer acknowledgement. By signing below, the buyer acknowledges receipt of all 3 pages of this addendum and acknowledges that although the seller has used best efforts to identify the amount of the fees stated herein, the precise amount of the fees may not be known until written disclosure documents are furnished by the association management companies per Arizona law. Buyer further acknowledges that broker did not verify any of the information contained herein. Buyer therefore agrees to hold seller and brokers harmless should the fees payable upon close of escrow prove incorrect or incomplete. The undersigned agrees to the additional terms and conditions set forth above and acknowledges receipt of the copy hereof. Buyer signs. This is given to the seller with their offer. If the seller agrees, seller accepts here. If the seller does not like any of this, that is stated on a counter offer, or can be addressed in an addendum if you have a conversation with the seller. But keep in mind, before contract acceptance, everything negotiable should be done on a counter offer. After contract acceptance, things are done on addendums. Any questions about the HOA addendum? Perfect. Okay. Let's move on to seller disclosures. Otherwise known as the SPUDS, SPDS, not SPUDS. Residential seller disclosure advisory. When in doubt, disclose. Does anybody know the number one reason why sellers are sued in the state of Arizona, or really anywhere? Anybody know the answer? It is because they failed to disclose something. Arizona law requires the seller to disclose material important facts about the property, even if you are not asked by the buyer or a real estate agent. These disclosure obligations remain even if you and the buyer agree that no seller property disclosure statements will be provided. If you know something, disclose it. This is designed to assist you, the seller, in making these legally required disclosures and to avoid inadvertent non-disclosures of material facts. To satisfy your disclosure obligations and protect yourself against alleged non-disclosure, you should complete the SPUDS by answering all questions as truthfully and as thoroughly as possible. Attach copies of any available invoices, receipts, permits, warranties, inspection reports, and leases to ensure that you are disclosing accurate information. Use the blank lines to explain your answers. If you do not have the personal knowledge to answer a question, it is important not to guess. Use the blank lines to explain the situation. If the buyer asks you about an aspect of the property, you have a duty to disclose information, even if you do not consider the information material. You also have a legal duty to disclose facts when disclosure is necessary to prevent a previous statement from being misleading or misrepresented. For example, if something changes. Great example of this is if you go under contract, the buyer has an inspection done, things are discovered in the inspection, the buyer cancels. You have now been given an inspection of your home. You have to now disclose all of those things that were discovered. So updating the seller disclosures, or with permission from the buyer, because it's not your inspection to share, it's their inspection, to provide a copy of that inspection report to any future offers. Because again, you have to disclose those things. Most people will just update the seller disclosures, but what is important to one person may not be important to another. And then you get, go back to the, are you supposed to disclose it just because you don't feel it's important? It might be, that kind of thing. So I always just get permission to share the previous inspection. You do not have to make the legally required disclosures. I'm sorry, if you do not make the legally required disclosures, you may be subject to civil liability. Under certain circumstances, non-disclosure of a fact is the same as saying that the fact does not exist. Therefore, non-disclosure may be given the same legal effect as fraud. Note, these disclosures are warranties that survive closing. So just make sure your sellers are reading this and that they understand just how important it is to disclose. If you are using the Arizona Association of Realtors Residential Resale Real Estate Purchase Contract, the seller is required to deliver a completed AAR residential SPUDS form to the buyer within 3 days after contract acceptance. If the seller does not provide the seller disclosures as the contract requires, the seller is potentially in breach of the contract, thereby enabling the buyer to cancel this transaction and receive the earnest money deposit. So 3 days after contract acceptance, you have to provide this to the buyer's agent. By law, sellers are not obligated to disclose that the property has been 1, site of a natural death, suicide, homicide, or any other crime classified as a felony. 2, owned or occupied by a person exposed to HIV or diagnosed as having AIDS or any other disease not known to be transmitted through common occupancy of real estate. Or 3, located in the vicinity of a sex offender. However, the law does not prevent a seller who makes an intentional misrepresentation. For example, if you are asked whether there has been a death on the property and you know there has been such a death, you should not answer no or I don't know. Instead, you should either answer truthfully or respond that you are not legally required to answer that question. Questions about page 1? Perfect. Okay. Message to the seller. Sellers are obligated by law to disclose all known material important facts about the property to the buyer. The SPUDS is designed to assist you in making these disclosures. If you know something important about the property that was not addressed on the SPUDS, add that information to the form. Prospective buyers may rely on the information you provide. Instructions: complete this form yourself. Answer all questions truthfully and as fully as possible. Attach all available supporting documentation. Use explanation lines as necessary. If you do not have the personal knowledge to answer a question, use the explanation lines to explain. For example, a home had an addition added. It was permitted, but the previous seller did it. You did not do it. You are not aware of who did it. You would just put that I know the previous seller did this addition to the property. It was prior to me owning the property. I am not sure who they used. You disclosed it, you explained the situation, done. By signing on line 9, you acknowledge that the failure to disclose known material information about the property may result in liability. Message to the buyer. Although sellers are obligated to disclose all known material important facts about the property, there are likely facts about the property that the sellers do not know. Therefore, it is important that you take a role in obtaining information about the property, aka getting home inspection done. Instructions: review this form and any attachments carefully. Verify all information. Ask about any incomplete or inadequate responses. Inquire about any concerns not addressed on the seller disclosures. Review all other applicable documents such as CCNRs, association bylaws, surveys, rules, or other title, report, or commitment. Obtain professional inspections of the property. Investigate the surrounding area. The following are representations of the seller and are not verified by the broker or the agents. It is not a required document as of yet. I'm working on it. But the buyer advisory is the perfect document to give any buyer that you work with because it is full of great information and it reminds the buyer that it is the buyer's obligation to do any due diligence, have inspections done, anything like that. We are not obligated to do this for them. We do not know what is important to them. By giving them the buyer advisory, we are saying if something is important to you, you should be able to find it in this buyer advisory. It goes through things from getting the home inspection, covers termites, registered sex offenders, all that fun stuff. Not that that's fun, I'm just saying. It gives them a document that has hyperlinks in it that gives them the ability to do research if it's important to them. Okay. So I am not going to read through all of this. I do recommend that you read through it on your own time, but basically this is where it starts for the seller. They need to fill out who the legal owner is, what the property is, does this property include any leased land, blah, 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 blah. This has been updated, and one of the main things that they updated on this is line number 20. Is the legal owner of the property a foreign person pursuant to the Foreign Investment in Real Property Tax Act, FIRPTA? Yes or no? If this is not checked, you need to give it back to the seller's agent and be like, hey, they missed something. Well, if anything is unchecked, ask about it. Why isn't this checked? This is huge. Title doesn't always catch their foreign investors. And if title doesn't catch it and you guys close, then your buyer could be responsible or on the hook for 15% of the sales price for taxes. So this is one reason why this form was updated. They just went into a little bit more detail on questions. This form talks about the HOA. Again, this is a form that the seller fills out as well as the HOA, but here's another area for the HOA. It kind of goes through all that. Are you aware of any recorded, tax liens, stuff like that? Are you aware of any assessments affecting the property? Yes or no? Let's see, what are some other good ones on here? Any potential violations? Is there any HOA violations that are in the works, that kind of stuff? Let's see, it talks about the roof, if there's been any leaks. Talks about termites. It gives, a hyperlink here. I don't know if that's a hyperlink or not. No, it's not, but you can have them, copy and paste that in their web browser, and they can go searching about termites, especially if they're not aware of what they are here in Arizona. HOA, plumbing, all this fun stuff. Does that have a pool, electrical, related systems? It talks about pets. Oh, this is a good one. Are you aware or have you observed any of the following anywhere on the property? It's very important that if a property has had a scorpion that you disclose it, and then how many, how often, that kind of stuff. It's really important in Arizona. Okay, notice to the seller and buyer. A contractor's license is required for work performed on a property unless the aggregate contract price, including labor and material, is less than $1,000, and the work performed is on a casual or minor nature, and no building permit is required. An unlicensed property owner may also perform work themselves to the property, is intended for occupancies solely by the owner. If, however, the property is listed or offered for sale or rent within 1 year of the completed work, it is considered prima facie, evidence that the owner performed the work for purposes of sale or rent. Owners of property who are acting as developers who improve structures or appurtenances to structures to their property for the purposes for sale or rent, and who contract with a licensed general contractor must identify the licensed contractor's name and license numbers in all sales documents. So just reiterate this to the seller, especially if they've just done a whole bunch of updating to the property and they're planning on selling it within a year of the work getting done. Some of them, if you answer no to something, then you can skip to a certain line. So if you're a seller's agent and you're kind of reading through, a buyer's agent, and you're reading through this prior to your client signing it, because you're looking for any information that's important missing. Well, if I have a check no, if I check this yes, then I know that these should be filled out. But if it's no, then I know I can skip to line 187 because this doesn't pertain to it. Oh, this is a good one too. So utility information. Make sure that this is filled out, because when you get closer to closing, you're going to want to provide this information to your buyer so that they can get their services set up. So this is super important. So I always like to make sure that this is filled out. If it's not filled out completely, then I would go back to the seller's agent and just ask them to provide that information, because it is super important. Notice to the buyer, if the property is served by a well, private company, or a municipal water provider, the Arizona Department of Water Resources may not have made a water supply determination. For this information about water supply or any above services, contact the provider. Let's see. Solar, if it has solar, this is where you would find that. Super important if it's checked solar and then these are left blank, that's not a red flag, but you should be going, wait a minute, it says it's solar, but there's no information here. So you just want to make sure it's filled out. Also, if it has solar, you want to make sure that you have read through not you, but your client has read through the terms of the lease, that you provided them with a copy. It should be uploaded with the listing prior to you making your offer, because again, that could affect your ability to make an offer and ability to qualify for that home, because if it has solar that's leased, that becomes part of your approval. So if you're approved for a $450,000 home and your home that you're buying is $450,000, but it has leased solar, that probably isn't going to work. Or you might have to go in under asking because you have to factor in that lease payment. Wastewater treatment, is the entire property connected to a sewer? Let's say it's checked yes, but you know that it's on a county island or a part of town, maybe in Mesa, that is known for having septic systems. That might just be not a red flag, but just like hey, I think I need to investigate this. I have had that happen where I had the seller, they hired me to sell their home. They did not use me to buy their home because I didn't know them at this time. But when they purchased the home, they were told that it was hooked up to sewer. So they never noticed on their water bill that there was no sewer payment due. They were a young couple, just really didn't know what they were doing, or what to look for. And so I knew it was a county island, that the homes around them were on septic. And so I said, are you sure that you're actually connected to a sewer system? And going back from the previous listings, sure enough, it was on a septic system, but one of the agents prior to their agent and me, did not do their due diligence. And so they just assumed that it was connected to the sewer. So the previous agent that my client used to purchase a home did not do their due diligence. They just copied and pasted and then put in that information to listing. Their buyer's agent did not verify that it was actually septic or connected. And then my client bought it thinking it was connected and then went to sell it and there was septic. So they had to have the septic inspected and fixed, and it was just this whole mess. But because I knew what I was doing and what I was looking for, it really helped my seller not get into a pickle in the future because we disclosed it was septic. Okay. I have no idea what a lift pump is, but it has something to do with septic. Let's see. Maybe it doesn't have to do with septic. Septic's here. A lift pump. I will look that up. I just don't know what it is. Let's see. Notice to the seller and the buyer, the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality requires a pre-transfer inspection of the on-site waste treatment facility on resale properties no more than 6 months prior to close of escrow. If it's 6 months and a day that you're going to close escrow, the seller has to have it re-inspected. Just an FYI. Notice to the buyer, especially out in the country, the Arizona Department of Real Estate provides earth fissures maps to any member of the public in printed or electronic form upon request. If you're in the vicinity of an airport, railroad, any of these other, just make sure you're disclosing it. Oh, has the property ever been a meth lab? That's always an important one. Notice to the seller and the buyer pursuant to the Arizona law, a seller shall provide a written disclosure to the property if the property is located in the territory in the vicinity of a military airport or ancillary military facility. So basically, Luke Air Force Base, I'm sorry, that's Nebraska, Litchfield Park, Litchfield Air Force Base, out in Litchfield, that definitely has to be disclosed to anyone in the surrounding area. I always like to disclose any airport in the vicinity, whether it's big or small, because again, when in doubt, disclose. Flood insurance. If they're in the vicinity of a flood area, floodplain, then a lender may require them to have purchased flood insurance. That's not necessarily something that you need to verify. That would be something that the lender can verify. But if you ever have any concerns, you can always reach out to the lender or to a home owner's policy person like Randy Jackson with Goosehead Insurance, one of our affiliated members, also an agent here at ProSmart. 303 to 313. This is just some blank space that you can use for any additional information that you feel is important or material fact. Seller signs this. So that is a ton of information that a buyer has to go through. And most of the time we're just sending this to the buyer with their offer to have them initial and sign it. And they're not really taking the time to read through this. So make sure you are sending this to the buyers in a separate email saying, this is a seller disclosure. Read through this completely and thoroughly. There is important information about the property that you need to be aware of. And I will send this to you separately for you to initial and accept when you put in your offer. So don't just send it to them to sign and then forget about it, because 9 times out of 10, they haven't read this. They've just gone and clicked through the signature or signing pages, and they haven't paid the attention that they need to this form. I recommend you take the time to thoroughly read through this question by question, just so you're more familiar with it. It is a ton of information. Does anybody have any questions regarding the residential seller's disclosure, otherwise known as the SPDS? Perfect. Well, that is all for tonight's class. Keep an eye out for the material that we will be covering next week. We'll either be covering 2, if not 3 addendums based on the time that it will take to go through them. Thank you so much for coming. Have a great evening.
Thanks, Tina.